Hey, Kyle here again, introducing you to After Effects. If you're just starting here, make sure to check out the previous videos to make sure you haven't missed anything. In those earlier videos, we worked mostly with imported artwork. Photoshop and Illustrator are great creation tools, and it's very common to use them to create art that you will then bring into After Effects to animate. But in this video, we're going to look more at using After Effects as a design tool directly and exploring more of the creative capabilities within this app. I'll be showing you some additional compositing options you can use to create more complex looks, and we'll also explore a few more of the effects and other tools that you can use to create content directly within After Effects itself. There are a ton of effects in here. It's half of the name, after all. Some of these effects will need an image or video clip to be effective. Some might actually be partially controlled by a different layer in your composition, and several of them can actually create new pixels all by themselves. I'm going to showcase a few different examples here to hopefully get you excited to try more of them for yourself. But first, I want to give you a few insights into the way After Effects processes the visuals that you create to help you understand the flexibility you have in here. If you'd like to follow along, you can find these two images in your downloaded assets folder, but feel free to use any other images you'd like. Your specifics will look a little bit different, but the ideas will be the same. I've created a new After Effects project and imported those two images. I'll start by grabbing this orange background PNG and drag that over here to where it says New Composition from Footage. As the name implies, that creates a new composition with the specs from this image. Then I'll come back to my project panel and grab this Boulders JPEG and drag that into my composition as well. You'll see this is pretty big, so I'll zoom out and scale this down, holding Shift to scale that proportionally. I would like to draw a mask on this layer, so I'll come up to my toolbar and long press on this shape tool, which gives me access to other shapes in here. I would like to select the ellipse tool, and then making sure that I still have that layer selected, I'll click and drag to start drawing a mask, and I can hold Shift to make that a perfect circle. Once I've drawn that, I can press V to go back to my normal selection tool, and once I click off of that, you'll see the layer's bounding box comes back, but now it's constrained to the size of that mask. I can now grab this and move it around wherever I'd like in my viewer. Or if I would like to change where that mask sits on the layer, you can double click the mask and you'll see that has its own style of bounding box. You can move that around without moving the layer itself. Or double click to confirm that. And I could single click on any of these Bezier points and edit those individually. I'll press Q to reselect that shape tool and then draw a second mask on this layer. And you'll see that in this case, that adds to the shape that I created. Let's come down here to our timeline to check out some of these mask properties. Each mask has an invert switch right here, or this drop-down menu that allows you to choose different modes for each mask. I'll set mask 2 to subtract. So up here in the viewer, that second mask is now cutting away from that first shape that we created. If I were to come down here and drag mask 2 above mask 1, you'll see I get a totally different result. In this case, mask 2 is subtracting itself from the main shape, so it's a cutaway, and then mask 1, since it's below mask 2, is now adding itself back into that shape. I'll just undo to get that original arrangement back, and now I would like to add an effect to this layer. I'll come over to my Effects and Presets panel, and while I could search for this effect, I will actually just come down to my color correction menu and twirl that open. I'm looking for the tritone effect, and since I currently have my layer selected, I can just double click to apply that. You'll see this doesn't look all that different because this image was already kind of brown in this case. But if I come over to the top left, you'll see in my effect controls, I can change the highlights, midtones, and shadows of this image. I'll click on the color chip for midtones, and I'll be using this medium teal here, which is 1C9193. You can use whichever color you'd like. And you'll see now it changed that image to be tinted with those colors. I'm going to add another effect. From the same menu here, we'll grab Levels. And again, just double click to apply. Coming back to my effect controls, the Levels effect gives us the ability to move the black point and white point of an image. So I'll just bring that black in quite a bit and bring the white in quite a bit. And this is going to make this image much higher contrast. The thing I want to show you is if I grab this levels effect and drag it above tritone, now I get a very different effect in my viewer. Because in this case, now I'm crushing that image down to the point where there's almost no gray for these midtones to affect anyway. This concept is pretty important here in After Effects, where the outcome of an effect or tool may depend on what else you've already applied, and where that sits relative to those other things that you've already applied. I'll disable this tritone effect by clicking on the little effects button right here, and then come down to my timeline. And if you don't currently see your blending modes, remember there's this toggle switches and modes button down at the bottom. Then under this modes heading, I'll click on this drop-down menu and set this layer to multiply. Multiply blending mode makes white pixels transparent, so as you can see here in the viewer, that's what we're getting. Again, if I come back and adjust the white setting on this levels effect, you'll see that makes a big difference in terms of the visibility here, because this blending mode is showing only the dark pixels. So if I change the white and black values of the layer, it's going to affect the way that it's composited. To show you yet another option, I'll come up to the layer menu and choose New Adjustment Layer. Adjustment layers have no content of their own, but when you apply effects to them, that effect is applied to everything that sits below the adjustment layer in your timeline. I'll come down here and twirl open the effects for that boulder's JPEG and grab that tritone effect that we had before, copy that, and paste it to our adjustment layer, and then come up and re-enable that. And now that tritone effect is applying to everything below the adjustment layer. These work like normal layers, so I can move this around, and now you'll see that it's applying to everything below it, but only in the areas where it's actually visible. To take this even further, I could press Q to get my shape tool back and draw a mask on this adjustment layer. And now that effect is only visible below this adjustment layer, but only within the bounds of that mask. Cool, right? This can be a lot like working in Photoshop, but with time. I'm using still images here to keep things simpler, but the ability to easily do this with video and to animate these layers in addition to the effects and compositing we just added enables you to create almost anything you can imagine. And since these properties can be animated, it means that most of the features in here are totally non-destructive and always stay flexible. For example, once you start animating, you may find that those masks we just created don't quite get the effect you're after. To simplify things a bit, I'll just delete that adjustment layer, delete both of the masks from boulders, set this back to the normal blending mode, and turn that tritone effect back on. If I deselect so I have no layers selected, and then press Q to reselect my shape tool, this time when I draw up in the viewer, I'll be creating a shape layer. And in this case, I'm going to use that as a matte for this boulder image. If you look down in your timeline, right next to the modes column is a thing called Trackmat. Every layer has a little drop-down menu as well as another pick whip, so you could drag that to certain layers if you want. But in this case, on my boulders layer, I'll set this from no matte to shape layer 1. And now that layer is only visible within that shape layer that I just drew. But the cool thing is that these two layers are both completely independent. This allows you to move or animate both of these layers completely separately. Let's say you wanted to reuse that animated texture we created earlier, but have it only apply to a specific shape. Trackmats are a great way to achieve this. By default, a layer's visibility switch is turned off when it's set as a track mat for another layer. But you can always turn that right back on if you like. And now this texture and the circle are both visible, but the texture is only visible within the circle shape. Pretty powerful, huh? All right, getting back to those effects. Because of the way After Effects works, you'll find that there are some looks that will actually be quite a bit easier and more flexible if you create them directly in here. I've started another new After Effects project here, and this time I'll be working with this world map PNG from your downloaded assets. To create a composition from this layer, as well as dragging it over here, you can also right-click and choose New Comp from Selection. Now this PNG actually has transparency, as you'll see if I toggle that transparency grid here. So I'd like to create a background color to sit behind that. I'll come up to Layer, New, and choose Solid. This creates a layer of solid color at the composition size, unless I choose to change it, and you get to choose whichever color you'd like. I'll be using this deeper blue 212D5F, but again, you can use whichever color you'd like. It will create that above my other layer, so I just need to come down to my timeline and drag that below. Now I'm going to pre-compose those two layers, which is another way to apply one effect to multiple layers at once. I'll just click and drag to select both of these, and then come up to Layer, Pre-Compose. And make sure I give this a good name, like Map Pre-Comp. And then hit OK. Now these are both treated as a single layer in this composition, but as you'll remember from before, I can double-click to get access to those layers inside there if I want. But I'm planning to apply one effect to both of them. In addition to getting effects from the effects and presets, you can right-click on a layer, choose Effect, and then navigate to the appropriate folder. In this case, I'm looking under Perspective for CC Sphere. Here it's wrapped my layer around a sphere, and I have some controls where I can change things like the radius and twirl open this rotation. And look at this, I now have a totally customizable globe. I could even come down here and adjust the light and shading if I would like. With effects like this one, you could totally just use After Effects as part of a static design pipeline, just to take advantage of that flexibility. To export this to use somewhere else, I could come up to Composition and choose Save Frame As File. As before, I just need to choose where it saves. And then I get my same render queue. You can choose a format that supports transparency in this case, since this image has it. I'll choose PNG and make sure that my channels are outputting RGB plus alpha. That will retain all that transparency information. Choose OK, and then just render. And there's our image with transparency. I probably should have trimmed that down first, but you get the idea. I've got one more effect to show you before we move on. The name may not sound that exciting, but it's extremely versatile, and it's one of my favorite effects, fractal noise. I'm again in a brand new project here, and I'll just click this New Composition button. I think an HD at 24 frames per second will be just fine, and 8 seconds duration sounds great. I'll press Ctrl or Command Y to create a solid again, and the color doesn't really matter. Let's come over to the effects and presets and search for fractal noise, which is under the noise and grain group. Now, this doesn't look like much at first, but trust me, it's pretty cool. Let's dig into some of the controls. You actually have quite a few of them over here, including several that can be twirled open, like transform. And you can choose from different fractal types, different noise types, and all sorts of other things that you can adjust. Just to show you some of the versatility, I'll change the noise type to block, bring this complexity all the way down to 1, and maybe change the contrast, turn that up quite a bit, bring the brightness down. And look at that. Now we have an abstract block pattern. Coming back over here, this evolution control allows you to animate this texture over time. So you can do all kinds of neat stuff. I'll press that reset button up at the top of the effect panel here. And then let's start by bringing the scale way down. Bring the contrast back up and bring that brightness down quite a bit until we have just little speckles here. And honestly, this isn't too far from some of the textures we were using earlier. And remember, you can animate this, which gives you some really neat capabilities. Okay, last one. We'll reset one more time, set the fractal type to dynamic twist, bring that contrast up to about 200, bring the brightness down to about -20 or so. I think that's good. And now I'll create a keyframe for evolution, and then press End to jump to the end of my timeline and just scrub that value up to around 1 full rotation. So we get something like this. Almost like a slow motion fire already, huh? Well, let's take that a little bit further. I'll come back to my effects and presets and search for gradient ramp. And once I apply that, what happened to my effect? This effect renders itself over everything else. But if we were to take this and drag it above fractal noise, and then look at the very bottom of fractal noise, this effect actually has its own blending mode built right in. So I could change this from normal to screen, and now we're getting that fractal noise pattern on top of the gradient ramp. Let's add one more. Back to our old friend tritone. Add that, and let's do a couple color tweaks here. For the highlights, we'll set those to this pale yellow, F4, F6, B7. And for the midtones, we'll set those to this medium red, F45B52. And wow, look at this. We've created this cool animated fire pattern. And remember, the order of all of these effects matters. If I took tritone and moved it above fractal noise, now it would be tritoning that gradient ramp, and the fractal noise is screening itself above that result. If you want to get really crazy, we'll come over here and look for CC sphere again and add that to the result. Turn this radius up a bit, and now we've created a fire planet. All of that with just a handful of effects on one layer. And of course, you could come and adjust any of these properties to make this look however you want. We're just scratching the surface here because there are hundreds of effects in this program. And as you've already seen, they can be combined in so many different ways. Even just changing the order of 2 effects may give totally different looks. So this is me empowering you to get in here and explore. Play around. You really can't break anything, I promise. If you feel like spending some time exploring those effects for yourself right now, feel free to pause. I'll be here when you're done. When you are ready to move on, we're going to check out an extremely powerful feature we've only used in a very simple way so far: shape layers. You can easily convert existing Illustrator artwork to shape layers. Simply select the layer you want to convert, come up to the Layer menu and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. You'll see the original layer still exists, but has been disabled, and now we have a shape layer in its place. Looking over at the Properties panel, you'll see that we have the normal layer transforms, some layer contents that I'll dig into in just a second, and then we have some shape properties, in this case, just a path and a fill color. And while this could be an easy way to change the fill color of a shape, it's kind of overkill in this case. Let's come over to our timeline and twirl this open to see what's going on. Within our contents, there's something called Group 1, and then inside that we have a path, which is the vector path we just converted, and then we have a fill. And if we twirl that open, you'll see we have a fill color and a few other properties inside here. Let's say that we wanted to add a stroke to this as well. This add flyout right here has a lot of options. You can add additional shapes, you can add fills and strokes, and all this other cool stuff we'll talk about in a minute. Let's just add a stroke to this layer and open this up. Let's increase the stroke width a bit. And then I'll come up to my viewer, and let's say we wanted to change something about this path. All of these points are now editable, and of course that means they can be animated as well. But you can also create shape layers directly in After Effects using either the Shape tool or the Pen tool. Again, having no layers selected, you can use the Shape tool and just click and drag to make a shape of your choice. Or using the Pen tool, you can click to make corners or click and drag to make rounded vertexes. In either case, these shape layers are native vector layers, which means that if I scale this up, these edges will always look nice and clean. These might look pretty basic right now, but once we dig into these a little bit, you'll see that these are basically a mini version of Adobe Illustrator inside a single layer. And that ability to have multiple shapes inside a single layer is what makes these so powerful. Looking down in the timeline, you'll notice I only have one layer in my composition. Let's look over here at the Properties panel, and you'll see we have our normal layer transforms, as you'd expect, for this layer. Then we have layer contents. We have a rectangle, which is this rectangle I drew on the left. And then we have shape 1, which is that Bezier path I just drew. This shape has a path, and then a stroke and fill, and these internal shape transforms. I'll talk about that in just a minute. If I select rectangle 1, you'll see it doesn't have a path, it has a size property. This is what's called a parametric shape, meaning that these values are actually what determines what this shape looks like. In the case of a rectangle, we can just resize the rectangle. You can unlink these so that you can change these values by themselves, or you can change this roundness value to round the corners. Stroke and fill are fairly self-explanatory. You can change the color like this, you can change the width of that stroke, and then you have some options for the cap and join. Both strokes and fills can also be set to gradients. You'll then get some little controls in the shape itself so you can remap that gradient. Since we can have multiple objects inside a single layer, that's what these shape transform properties are for. You'll see I have this position right here, and if I start scrubbing this over, you'll see our rectangle is moving, but the other shape is not. That's because only this particular group, which is called rectangle 1, is being affected by these transform properties. And if you look over in the viewer, you'll know that we have very similar behavior to when we're working with layers, where this rectangle 1 group sits below shape 1 inside the shape layer, which is what dictates what's on top in your viewer. If I come down to my timeline and I drag rectangle 1 above shape 1, you'll see now that sits on top in my viewer. And this is the key to shape layers. Everything in here can be twirled open and they have their own individual visibility switches. Even right here, dragging the fill above the stroke changes the look of that shape. I'll select this contents heading right here. And looking at this add flyout again, I'll choose merge paths. And in this case, that will take the fill and stroke from above. And then this merge paths has actually combined these two shapes into one single shape. If I twirl that open, we do have some options about how that functions. I could set this to subtract, for example, and now it's cutting shape 1 away from rectangle 1. Much like the effects we were exploring a few minutes ago, you can add several of these modifiers to a single shape layer, and the way you apply them can drastically change the result. Let's set this mode back to add, and then I'll come back to this menu and choose zigzag. Because of where it's located, this zigzag gets applied to both shapes. Let's close all of these up and take a minute to look at how this is structured. Rectangle 1, shape 1, those are being merged, and then zigzag is being applied, and then the stroke, and then the gradient fill. If I take this zigzag and I move it inside shape 1, now only shape 1 is being affected by that zigzag because it's inside this group. I love shape layers because they give you so much power to create in a very procedural and flexible way right here inside After Effects. There are just endless possibilities, but I know that can also feel like a lot to wrap your head around. So let's dive into our next example together to explore more of these possibilities in context. Here's the design we'll be creating. You can see there's a fair amount going on here, but we'll break it all down step by step, and you'll learn a ton about shape layers along the way. I'll be giving you the exact values for a lot of these properties as we build out these shapes. If you want yours to look exactly like mine, just follow me. But of course, you're free to add your own twist if you want to. Once again, I'm in a brand new After Effects project, and I'll just click on New Composition. I'll go ahead and rename this to Shape Design. This HD preset at 24 frames per second looks good, and I'll make sure my duration is set to 10 seconds, and hit OK. While we're creating most of this from scratch, I do have a few assets to import, so let's do that. From your Assets folder, we'll grab the dark blue background, orange background, and shape design reference. Import those, and while they're all still selected, let's drag them down to this folder icon and go ahead and name that Assets, and twirl that open. Let's grab our dark blue background and bring that into our composition. We'll see that's pretty large, so you can go ahead and scale that down. A little over 50% is fine, whatever looks good to you. I'll go ahead and set that layer to be dark green and lock it because we won't need to move that. I'd also like to import this shape design reference. And the first thing I'll do is right-click that and set it to be a guide layer. Guide layers are only for your reference. They won't show up when we export from After Effects later, so they're great when you need to match elements to an existing design. I'll press T to reveal that layer's opacity and set this layer down to 20%. We don't really need to see it that much, just enough to see the positions of everything. Let's start with this big star, and we're going to build that one completely from scratch. I'll come down to my timeline here, and anywhere in the empty area, you can right-click and choose New, Shape Layer. This will create a new empty shape layer with nothing in it. You'll see that our contents exists, but it's completely empty right now. So let's come over to Add and choose Polystar. And you can see up in the viewer, it creates a little polystar path for us. But to make sure we can see more easily, let's come back to Add and choose Fill. Let's twirl open our polystar path and adjust some of these values. Let's set points to 8. We don't need to adjust the position or rotation. Let's set the inner radius down to 32. You can press Tab to jump to the next field here and set the outer radius to 430. Tab to the inner roundness and we'll set that to -48 and outer roundness to 10. That looks good, but this is obviously the wrong color. So let's open up our fill, click that color chip, and I'll be using this pale yellow, which is F4, F6, B7. Since the elements in this layer aren't in a group, they aren't visible over in the properties panel yet. To change that, you can Control or Command click to multi-select these elements, and then press Control or Command G to group them. And now they're available over here. Let's go ahead and rename this layer to Big Star, and then grab that star and scoot it over to match the position in the reference image. Up next, we'll be creating this shape up in the top left, and I'll start by grabbing my Shape tool by pressing Q. If you're not already on the rectangle shape, you can just press Q a few more times to cycle through those options. I'm going to draw this as close as I can to the center of the composition, and then we'll move it into place after we build it. I'll just click and drag while holding Shift to create a perfect square. And then I'll come over here to my size property and adjust that to be 270, which is exactly the size I want. I also want to make sure under Shape Transform that I set this position to be exactly 0, 0, which puts this exactly in the center of my composition. We don't need a stroke on this shape, so we'll just change this from solid color to none. And then for a fill, we're using this pale green B0D2A0. All right, so we're halfway there, but we need to create that star to cut away from this shape. So down here in the timeline, under this Add Flyout, I'll click that and choose Polystar. You'll see it creates a Polystar path inside this group. We'll just open that up and adjust these properties as well. For points, I'll set those to 4. Tab down until I get to the inner radius, which I'll set to 65, outer radius to 136, and the inner roundness to 250. You can see the paths up here, but our shape doesn't look quite right yet, and that's because we need to add a merge paths to actually cut this away. So let's come back to our Add Flyout one more time, choose Merge Paths right here, and then set that to Subtract. Perfect. Let's go ahead and rename our layer Starbox. Maybe change its color to be this seafoam. Press V to get our selection tool and move this into place. And this is probably a good time to go ahead and save this project. These parametric shapes can be modified and combined to create all kinds of complex designs. And since you can change so many aspects of these shapes, it gives you a ton of options when animating. Let's animate that inner radius property here on our star box. We'll activate that stopwatch, move up to 1 second, and let's change this to about 145. Move up to 2 seconds and just copy paste that first keyframe. And then we'll come back to frame 0, open up our rectangle path, and we'll animate the size similarly. We'll press K to jump to that next keyframe, and let's change this to about 200. Press K to jump to that next keyframe here, and again, copy paste that first keyframe. Select all of these, press F9 to easy ease, and then let's copy, paste, KK, paste, KK, paste, KK, paste. And now we have this looping animation based on the properties of those two shapes. Come back to frame 0. Let's collapse all of this. And under the layer transform, we'll animate the layer's rotation. Just press End and set that to -90, even though it doesn't look any different in the viewer. Now, one tip when you're creating looping animations, you actually want this last keyframe to be 1 frame beyond the last frame of your timeline. That way, when it loops, the first frame is that value. To see this clearly, I'll click the solo switch right here so that we're not seeing the background as well. And let's do a preview just to see how that feels. All right, pretty cool. Up next, we'll tackle these orange circles at the bottom. So again, let's press Q a few times until you get to the ellipse tool. Click and drag, again holding Shift to create a perfect circle. I actually want these to be 100 on size, but if you get close enough, that's fine. And now we're going to use one of my favorite shape layer tools, the repeater. We'll come down here to Add and choose Repeater. And you'll see now we have 3 copies of the circle, but there's only 1 path. If we twirl open Repeater, you can make copies of this, and then yet another transform instance here, where you decide what happens to those copies. Let's set copies up to 7. And then within that repeater transform, let's set the position to 120, 0. Okay, so we have one row. How do we get a second row? Well, all you have to do is duplicate that repeater. So Control or Command D will open this up, change the copies to 2, and then change the position from 120, 0 to 0, 120. And now we're creating all of these copies from just the single path right here. So if I change something about this path, all of the copies will change at once. To animate this layer, I'd like to show you one more trick. We can close up those repeaters and then add Wiggle Transform. Now by default, it's going to place it higher up in the stack, but all you have to do is drag that down below the repeaters. We'll open this one up, and then we get all kinds of properties here. The thing I want us to check out is yet another transform inside here. Let's change this to 8, 8. And now you'll see all of your circles get a little bit off position. If we do a preview, they're all wiggling around, all on their own. This wiggle transform tells each of the copies to be affected by some value that you change here. You can change scale and rotation as well if you like, up to however many times per second you tell it. Let's change this down to 1 and change the correlation to 0. So it'll be nice and random for us. And with another preview, you'll see we get this nice drift here. Let's go ahead and rename this layer to dots. But you might have noticed this layer isn't the right color. We're actually going to use that orange background. So let's grab that and bring it in. Toggle the switches and modes if your track mat is not already visible, and set the orange background to use those dots as the track mat. Now we can close that up, reposition that background however you like, and now those orange dots will show us that cool texture. All right, we've done a handful of examples with those parametric shapes now. To change things up, let's try free drawing something with the pen tool. We'll be recreating this arrow with the dashed line. So let's zoom in a bit and then hold the spacebar to get your temporary hand tool to scoot that over. And then we'll come up and grab our pen tool, or you can press G to activate that. And before I start drawing, I see that I still have a fill and no stroke. So let's go ahead and change that. You can click on the word fill and turn that off, and then click on the word stroke and set that to solid here. Okay, and let's go ahead and turn that width up to 3. So now I will click and drag to make curved points. Click and drag, click and drag. You want to do this in as few points as you can. It's okay if it's not perfect now. We can come back and fix it. Click and drag, and click and drag. Now you can press V to get your selection tool, and you can come back and manipulate these points. You can adjust the point itself, or you can adjust the handles. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just get it in the ballpark. A little bit more, there we go. Then I will click off of that shape, but you'll notice the layer itself is still selected. I'll press G to go back to my pen tool, and let's draw this arrowhead. So I'll click and drag, and now I need to break this corner, so I don't want a smooth corner, I want it sharp. If I hold Alt or Option, my tool will change, and I can break that handle like this, release Alt or Option, and then you can come down here, click and drag. Looking at our layer, you'll see we created 2 shapes. That top one is the arrowhead we just drew, so let's go ahead and rename that to head, and then rename shape 1 to tail. Now, these aren't the right color, of course, so we can fix that in the Properties panel. You can actually select both of them right here and change the color for both at the same time. So let's click on that color chip and set this to 0A9294, this kind of medium teal. And then we need to set up our dashes on the tail. So let's deselect both of them, open up tail, open up the stroke, and inside here you'll see dashes. If you click this plus, it will create dashes for us. And you could leave it like this, but I'm going to make a small adjustment, setting the dash to 12 and the offset to 10. Perfect. To animate this, we're going to use another of these modifiers called trim paths. So I'll come up to add and choose trim paths. Let's close our stroke, open up trim paths. And the way this works is you have a start and an end value from 0 to 100. That's just the completion of this path. So if I scrub end all the way to 0, then it's not revealed at all. So let's create a keyframe for that. Come up here to about 1.5 seconds and bring end all the way up to 100. Let's press F9 to easy ease that and see how that feels with a quick preview. That'll work. Let's come back to that keyframe, select head, and we'll do another trim paths on that one. So add trim paths. Notice when you add one of these modifiers, when you have that group selected, it puts it inside the group. So I'll open up trim paths and let me show you a little trick. If I were to just adjust the end property, it would adjust from one side to the other, which is not quite what I want. So if you actually set both of these to 50, that means they'll be exactly 50%, which in this case should be the middle or pretty close. So we'll keyframe that, come up maybe about 8 or 10 frames, and then set the start back to 0. So you'll see it's revealing from 50% back to 0, and then the end from 50 up to 100. Select those, easy ease, and let's preview. Perfect. Quickly rename this to arrow. Maybe change that to cyan, and that looks good. Next up, we're going to create this wavy background shape. It's kind of a combo of everything we've learned so far. So using our pen tool again, let's just click, and then you can hold shift to make sure you're making a perfectly straight line, and click one more time. We just need a straight line here. I'm going to change my stroke width all the way up to 10 and change the color to 395979, this kind of medium dull blue. Now this line is way too thick, but there's a little trick inside the stroke options. So let's twirl our layer open, 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 and under our stroke, one more time, you'll see taper. So we can actually taper the stroke right here. If I adjust this start length, you'll see that it's tapering off the stroke. It's down to almost 0 right here, and then it thickens up as you get further over. So if we change both the start and end length to 100, I'll just click off this so you can see real quick. We have this cool looking line where it tapers away to nothing on both ends, and it's a little thicker in the middle. Let's close that up. And now we need a bunch of copies of this thing. So you know what that means. Add repeater. And we need, let's say, about 75 copies of this one. But we need those to be offset 0 in X and 16 in Y. There we go. Now it's filling up. Now let's make them wavy. Let's close up that repeater and add a zigzag. Okay, let's adjust those properties. Let's set that size up to 27. We can leave the ridges at 10, and we'll change the points from corner to smooth. All right, we're getting pretty close here. That looks pretty cool, but it's very regular. So let's add one more thing to make it feel a little more organic. Close up that zigzag, and we'll come back and add a wiggle paths. So this is different from the wiggle transform because this will actually wiggle the path itself. So for starters, it doesn't look quite like what we want. So let's open that up and adjust the size to 33, turn the detail all the way down to 0, and turn the points from corner to smooth. Now, these controls should look familiar because we just saw them in the wiggle transform. And that means that if we do a preview, these lines will actually be wiggling themselves. So if you like that, we can keep it. I'll maybe change this to 1 per second, just so it's not quite so fast. And this is one of those cases where you can decide whether creating a zigzagged path that is then wiggled and then repeated, or you want to repeat the path and then wiggle it afterwards. That creates a pretty chaotic look, and that's not quite what I'm going for here. So I will wiggle it first and then repeat that. We'll just rename this to wavy lines. And now, just to dial in the look, let's change the blending mode to multiply and bring the layer's opacity down to 80. This isn't in quite the right spot, so let's use our selection tool, grab that line, and just adjust this up into place. And of course, we need to bring this layer down below all the other new layers we've created. Let's turn off that reference layer and zoom back out. Okay, looking good. Just one thing left. To create this last shape, I'm actually going to reuse our dots. So let's grab that and duplicate it, bring it up to the top, and turn that on. We'll go ahead and name this semicircles. And let's open this up and get rid of some of the stuff we don't need. You can actually delete this stroke because it's turned off anyway. We'll delete repeater 1 and the wiggle transform. And then under repeater 2, let's open that up. Set copies to 3. And under the transform, we'll change this from 120 to 160. Now, this is obviously in the wrong spot, so let's just kind of move this whole thing up into place. And our ellipse isn't quite the right size, so let's make that much bigger, maybe about 320. Okay, so we obviously have an issue here. We need half circles and we have whole circles. Well, check this out. Trim paths actually works on filled shapes, but only when you use it right. So let me apply this trim paths and show you what I'm talking about. If I scrub this value, it's going to almost do this like a windshield wiper. So in most cases, that's not going to be what you want. But if you set this at exactly 50, it gives you half of the shape. Perfect. You can use this offset value to rotate that around. Hey, that's pretty cool. So if you set that to exactly 90, it will be perfect semicircles. Let's again use our selection tool, just kind of move that up into place. And we need to change the fill color. So let's click on that color chip, and that should be 0A9294 again. And again, we're going to change the blending mode of this layer. Let's say screen this time. And you can press T to reveal only the opacity, and we'll set this one to 80 as well. And now, once again, let's bring this down just above the wavy lines. I think I'm going to leave this one still, just because there'll probably be enough animation going on. We, of course, never animated our big star, so let's do that real quick. Here's our big star. Let's change that to yellow so we can see what we're doing here. And just open up the layer rotation by pressing R. And at frame 0, we'll just make a rotation keyframe. Go to the end, and let's just rotate that 90 degrees. And just like before, we're going to push that keyframe one frame over. Let's come over and turn off that reference layer, and let's do a preview and see what we've got. I think this is feeling really nice overall. I'm noticing that the arrowhead is just a little funny, so I feel like I'd like to fix that. I'll just select my layer and open this up. And this is a good reason not to color your layers the same color as the asset itself, because if you're working with paths, it can be a little difficult to see what you're doing. Let's change this to this fuchsia color, and then I'll select path 1 and zoom in. And now I can see these handles much better. So I'll just kind of clean that up, make that feel a little more even, and close that back up. Zoom back out, and let's do our final preview. How did yours turn out? I know that was a bit of an adventure, but hopefully you made it through, and maybe your version looks even better than mine. Shape layers can be a little bit technical, but hopefully you can see the value and all that flexibility. I know your brain is probably pretty full right now, but if I can sneak in just a little bit more info, I would love to show you the basics of working with text layers. Creating text is very similar to the other Adobe design apps. Simply grab your type tool or press Ctrl or Command T and then click in your viewer and type in your text. You can confirm that by pressing Ctrl or Command Enter or clicking somewhere else in your timeline. Pressing V to get back your selection tool, you can now move this around like any other layer. Like shape layers, this is a native vector object, so you can scale it up and the edges will always be nice and clean. Looking over at the Properties panel, you can see we can adjust all kinds of things about this text, like the typeface and the style, the size, line spacing, tracking, and the colors. If you click More, you can get additional text properties here. I'll go ahead and turn this to all caps, for example. Just below that are your paragraph settings, where you can change the alignment, or by pressing More, you get additional options right here. As of After Effects 2026, you can also edit and animate variable fonts here in After Effects. This rock grotesque typeface that I'm using also has a variable version that I downloaded from Adobe Fonts. So right next to the style dropdown, I can click on this little variable font button to expose those adjustable properties for this font. Which properties are available here will vary depending on the font, but you can also preview this functionality on Adobe Fonts before downloading. Most of these variable fonts will have width and weight available, but you'll find fonts with all kinds of other axes that give you tons of cool creative options, especially when you can animate these properties even per character. More on that in just a minute. If you'd like to create a text box, grab your type tool and click and drag in your viewer. Now you can type in a longer line of text that will auto-wrap to that box. After Effects refers to these as point text and paragraph text, and you can actually change a layer after it's already been created by using this little toggle here in the paragraph section of your properties panel. Of course, we're in After Effects, so let's add some animation. Like shape layers, the text animator can be a little bit technical, but I'll get you started with a few examples to help you understand how it works. I'm planning to animate the tracking of this text, which is the overall spacing between all the characters. In this case, you can see that if I change that, it's probably not going to be the desired effect. So let's undo. I will come down to the paragraph section and set the alignment to centered, and then let's move this back to the middle of the composition. You'll see over here we have a section for text animation, and I can click on Add Animator, and then just choose the property that I want to animate. In this case, that's tracking. You'll see this exposes a few things over in my timeline. I only want to worry about this tracking amount. I'll just deselect those and click the stopwatch for tracking amount to create a keyframe. Let's move up about 5 seconds and just set this to a slightly higher number. Now if I do a preview, you'll see that the text is animating until it hits that second keyframe and then stops. Using this plus a few simple scale keyframes, for example, can be a pretty easy way to bring text to life in a way that you can't do in a lot of other apps. Pretty straightforward, right? But this text animator also allows you to get much more complex, and you can actually apply these animations to individual words or characters. I've gone back just a few steps to before I added that animator, and added a couple layers to help explain what I'm about to show you. I'll add an animator for position this time, and let's look down in the timeline. This created something called Animator 1, Range Selector 1, and we have another position property here. I do want to point out that this is different from the layers position. What we're establishing here is a change that we're going to be making to the text characters themselves. So if I set this animator position to 0, -300, I've now moved all of the text characters by -300 in Y, but you can see the layer's anchor point is still down here. This range selector actually lets you determine which parts of your text layer are affected by this change. Similar to the trim paths that we worked with a minute ago, you have start and end values in here, and you can change or animate these. If I set end to 50%, for example, now only the first half of the text is changed, and then everything after that 50% is still back at its original value. The way this text animator works is kind of unique compared to other things here in After Effects, but once you wrap your head around it, it can be very powerful. Looking up in the viewer, you can actually see these two little boundary markers. These are your start and end values. And you can actually click and drag these. I think right between the A and the M should be, yep, now my end value is at 25%, and right now that's only affecting 25% of the text layer. Let's set end back up to 100, and then I'll actually animate the start value from 0 up to 100. Now with a preview, each character moves into place from the modified position back to the original position. What's cool about this is that now you can start adding additional properties, but they all use the same animation. From this little add flyout, I can choose Property Opacity. I'll set that down to 0, and now each character is both moving into place and fading on. To take this further, we could add a scale as well. Let's set this up to 300. Now each character is starting up here at 0 opacity and 300% scale, and then animating back to its original values. And just because we can, let's add some variable font fun into the mix. Since I'm working with a variable font right now, I can come back into that add flyout and find Property, variable font axes. You can add one specific axis. This one has either width or weight available, or use this convenient command to add all the available axes to your text animator at once. Just so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better, let's hop back to the beginning of the timeline and adjust that opacity back up. Since we already have scale in the mix, width might be a little too crazy here, but maybe we'll bring the weight way down. There's also an advanced section in here where you can change all kinds of things, like if we'd rather have this animating by word instead of by character. And now that's a totally different feel. This example is looking a little busy at this point, but hopefully that's helping you get an understanding for how you can add and edit the properties in here. Let's simplify by deleting the scale, the opacity, and those variable properties. So we're back to just the position movement. These ease high and ease low actually allow you to adjust the smoothness of the landing, if you want to call it that. So I'll take this ease low and turn that up to 100%, and watch what that does. Using this, each word really eases into place, and that's similar to those easy ease keyframes that we've been using. Now, in most cases, you'd probably be animating this text into place, maybe from off screen. All we need to do to accomplish that is simply change the position value. Let's come back to the beginning where the text is completely modified and simply change that position value until it's off the bottom of the screen. You can still see that bounding box of the text. And then, as we move through the animation, you'll see it's bringing each word up into place, but it still holds the position of those others to show you where they are. If you want to change the speed of the animation, just move the keyframes around. And now we've got some nice, crisp, clean text animation. And with just a few slight modifications, maybe adding those variable properties back in, we can add that right into the shape layer animation we just finished up. If you don't feel confident diving into those text animators quite yet, that's okay. There are dozens of presets you can use, and now you have at least some understanding of how they work. So in many cases, you'll just need to adjust the timing and maybe the value of the property that's being animated. You can find these in the Effects and Presets panel under Animation Presets, Text. Under Animate In, for example, there are nearly 40 presets in here, so just choose a couple of these. Apply them to your text layer and see how they work. I'll leave you with one last idea here. If you want to get really specific when animating a piece of type, you can actually convert it into a shape layer. On your text layer, just right-click and choose that Create menu we used before. Choose Create Shapes from Text. Similar to converting an Illustrator layer, it turns off your original type layer and creates a shape layer with all of those objects inside it. Looking over at the Properties panel, we now have shape groups for the T, E, X, and T, and it's actually created editable paths for each of these letters. So we could change any of these properties or transform these, or you can even animate the path itself. I'll just create a keyframe here, come up a little bit, and let's click here, grab a few of these points, and just drag down. And now we've animated the path itself. And of course, you could stack some effects on top of all of this as well. Just so many possibilities, right? I think of After Effects as kind of a big creative playground, and it allows you to realize and, of course, animate your ideas in so many different ways. I would really encourage you to try creating your own spin on the examples we created in this video. Try changing around the values or adding totally different effects. Dive into that text animator and see how crazy of a shape animation you can make. Every new thing you explore, you'll be learning along the way. Again, thanks so much for watching. In our final video, we'll be learning about a few more advanced concepts and even exploring a little bit of 3D. See you soon.